Welcome to meeting number 41 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, and the motion adopted on Thursday, June 11, 2026, the committee is meeting to study the subject matters of the main estimates 2026-2027 and the supplementary estimates A 2026-2027. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I would now like to officially welcome our witnesses for the first hour. Appearing in person, the Honorable Anita Anand, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Minister. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Arun Tangaraj, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sarah Wilshaw, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, International Trade and Chief Trade Commissioner, Alexandre Levesque, Assistant Deputy Minister, Europe, Middle East and Arctic Branch, Robert Brookfield, Director General, Sanctions and Strategic Export Controls, Shirley Caruthers, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, People and Corporate Management Branch. So I now invite the Minister to deliver her opening remarks of up to 5 minutes. Bienvenue.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment and thank the public service. It is National Public Service Week, and to the public servants who work here, ensuring this committee and other facets of the parliamentary process run well. Thank you so much. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear before committee today in order to speak to the main estimates for 2026-2027 and the supplementary estimates A.
Has asked for a total of $7.2 billion in budgetary spending, which reflects $6.8 billion in voted expenditures and $400 million in statutory expenditures. The supplementary estimates A, increase this request by an additional $23.9 million. Through principled pragmatism, we are strengthening our alliances, we're diversifying our partnerships in terms of trade, and we are championing multilateralism. Et notre objectif est simple, faire en sorte...
Our goal is simple, ensuring that Canada's international action brings more security, resilience, and prosperity for Canadians here in the country. Canada is transforming its economy in order to make it stronger and more resilient in order to face global issues. Over the past year, our government concluded over 20 economic partnerships and security partnerships on 5 continents, and we have opened access to a market of 1.5 billion new consumers.
Double our market access this year through our trade agreements with India, ASEAN, Mercosur, Thailand, and the Philippines. Our government aims to double non-U.S. trade and catalyze $1 trillion in investment in Canada over the next 5 years in energy, transportation, data, and defense, to name just a few sectors that we are focusing on. Alors que nous diversifions...
As we are diversifying our trade partnerships, we can't forget our fundamental values, and especially our commitment towards human rights. Our trade needs to reflect those values. Forced labor has no place in Canadian supply chains and does not have a place in the products that we have on our shelves.
Many should be trapped in an exploitative employment relationship so that others can benefit from lower costs. Canadians want confidence that our whole economy is built on fairness, not human exploitation. That is why last week we introduced Bill C-35, the ban on importing goods made with forced labor. And the legislation is going to give the CBSA broader authority to enforce prohibitions, establish a public list of at-risk goods, and require supply chain tracing before such goods can enter Canada. It's going to place the onus on importers to prove that their goods are free from forced labor. This is Canada standing up for human rights, and this is Canada standing up for workers' rights, Mr. Chair. We're demonstrating to other middle powers that you don't have to choose between strong trade and strong values. We're delivering both. Moving to humanitarian assistance, Canada's foreign policy is grounded in principled pragmatism, advancing national interests while remaining firmly anchored in our values. Humanitarian assistance is a core pillar of this approach. Haiti, Canada has committed more than $450 million to support stability there. Cuba, more than $13 million. Sudan, plus de
In Sudan, over $120 million. Lebanon, $37.7 million. It is always up to our government to ensure that we are there to support humanitarian assistance throughout the world.
A world marked by uncertainty and volatility. L'approche du Canada est claire.
Canada's approach is clear. We are going to reinforce our economic bases, support our alliances, and act in a way that respects our values.
We will be strategic in our partnerships, and we will be steady in our commitments. That is how Canada will remain secure at home and credible abroad. Thank you. Miigwech. Merci.
Thank you for your statement, Minister. And I now open the floor to questions from members, beginning with Mr. Michael Chong. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing. I have 2 questions on Taiwan, and then I'll go on to other questions. My first question is, MP Judy Sgro has indicated that she will lead a delegation of MPs to Taiwan this fall. If MP Sgro is sanctioned, will you commit to publicly defending the long-standing practice of Canadian MPs going to Taiwan?
Yes, of course I will. And I will base that point of view on the independence of Parliament and parliamentary privilege, which both are a pillar of Canada's democracy. Members of Parliament and senators have a long-standing practice of visiting Taiwan and indeed choosing the jurisdictions that they wish to travel to and represent Canadian interests, Canadian values. Successive Canadian governments have, in fact, maintained respect for the One China policy. That policy remains unchanged. But within that framework, Mr. Chair, Canada and Taiwan maintain significant economic, cultural, people-to-people ties. And as I reiterated at the beginning of my response, I will always stand up for our parliamentarians. And that applies in the member's case as well as in the member he mentioned case.
Thank you. Second question. Can you tell us when the Canada-Taiwan Trade Cooperation Framework Agreement is going to be finalized?
Actually, I want to begin this response by indicating that there are strong economic ties between Canada and Taiwan. Taiwan is ranked, for example, as Canada's 15th largest global merchandise trading partner, 6th largest in Asia, two-way merchandise trade totaling about $9 billion. And so the TCFA, the framework arrangement that the Honourable Member of Parliament mentioned, is not within my purview as Minister of Foreign Affairs, but I will say we will continue to advocate for strong trade relations as the economic relationship already exemplifies.
I appreciate that answer. I would note under the department, under the framework legislation for the Act, you are the lead minister over and above the other ministers, such as the Minister of International Trade. But I have a question relating to the protection of diplomats in Canada. As you know, earlier this year, there was a shooting at the U.S. consulate, and recently unsealed U.S. indictment indicates that U.S. authorities believe that that shooting is related to an IRGC or Iranian regime-linked network. you're responsible under the Vienna Convention for the protection of foreign missions here in Canada. Can you tell us if there is a link between the U.S. consulate shooting and the Iranian regime?
I want to start by underlining the importance with which we take the security and safety not only of Canadians, but foreign diplomats who are operating, representing their respective countries on Canadian soil. I also want to add that the IRGC is a listed terrorist entity in Canadian law, and we take that relationship on the terms that you have seen via that listing, as well as not having diplomatic relations with Iran for well over 10 years. In response to the question, the RCMP is working on this case. The investigation is proceeding, and I personally am not part of that investigation. As you can imagine, the rule of law mandates that the executive branch of government does not have play in the process of independent investigation. So I don't have information to divulge. I would like to close my answer by expressing deep sympathy to the family of the officer who was killed.
Understood. Thank you. Do you have any information that would link the U.S. consulate shooting to an Iranian-linked network?
As I indicated, in an ongoing investigation, it would be inappropriate for me to speculate, and I do not have information.
Okay, thank you. I'm not asking you to violate the sub judice convention. I'm asking you just simply, or to interfere with the ongoing criminal investigation. It was just a question about whether or not you have information linking the Iranian regime to that shooting. Another question I have.
Thank you. Sorry, we're just over time.
Well, I have 6 minutes.
Actually,
right?
1 more minute.
Yeah,
Sorry about
thank
that.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A final question. It's been 2 years, 24 months, since Bill C-70 was adopted by Parliament into law. The government officials at the time indicated that they had hoped it would be up and running within 12 months. It's now almost 2 years later. Can you tell us, while I know you're not the Public Safety Minister, Foreign Affairs has an important interest in this bill, seeing that it counters foreign interference. Can you tell us when this registry will be up and running?
Mr. Chair, my honourable colleague was in the House when that very question was put to the Minister of Public Safety. We've been absolutely clear that Canada's sovereignty must be respected, and he has been clear that we will be vigilant in our efforts to combat the spread of foreign influence at all levels of government. All this work is going to culminate in the establishment of that registry, and you have seen that we have made an appointment relating to the first Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner in Anton Boigman. The work continues, and we will continue to ensure that that particular policy effort is brought to its rightful conclusion with the establishment of the Commission with that member, that individual as the Foreign Interference Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is MP Rob Oliphant. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Now for some tougher questions, which is like what you like to do. Minister, in your plans, you have talked a lot about the Arctic and Arctic sovereignty. You have indicated that we will be looking at 2 consulates, and you have opened one in Nuuk, and you are looking at one in Anchorage. Can you talk about the importance of the Arctic in terms of our foreign policy and in terms of our strategic positioning in the world?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Bien sûr,
Thank you for the question. It's important to remember that when I was Minister of National Defense, it was very important for me to work on protecting the Arctic and ensuring its sovereignty. As Minister now of Foreign Affairs, I continue my work on this. I won't only be working with Minister McGuinty, I will also be working with other countries who believe that sovereignty in the Arctic is essential, especially given the current geopolitical situation. There is a threat, a Russian threat, close to the Arctic Circle.
With our like-minded partners, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, to ensure that we are together advocating for greater NATO focus on the Arctic. And indeed, in Sweden recently, the United States joined a meeting of those countries, and we together issued a statement which indicates and underlines our forward-looking work together, given that the geopolitical environment is indeed seeing the Russian threat moving further and further north towards the Arctic Circle. I will also say on that NATO point that, yes, NATO came forward with an operation called Arctic Sentry earlier this year, and that is on a permanent presence basis. And that is a very important initiative, and indeed, when I was opening the consulate in Greenland, in Nuuk, Greenland, earlier this year, it was very important to discuss not only Canada's commitment, but NATO's commitment to the security, sovereignty, territorial integrity of Denmark and Greenland. But at the same time, NATO should have a full-blown strategy relating to the Arctic. Sentry is not a strategy, it is an exercise, an operation. And so I've raised this issue with Secretary General Mark Rutte, and in the meeting of the Arctic 7 in Sweden that I just mentioned, and we will be working within NATO with like-minded countries to work towards that full-blown strategy for NATO on the Arctic.
This committee has done quite a bit of work on the Arctic foreign policy, and one of our requests of the government is constant engagement with the people of the North, and that includes the territorial governments as well as First Nations and Inuit governments. Can you advise the committee on whether or not those people will still have an ongoing consultative role in your ongoing evolution of the Arctic foreign policy?
Absolutely. Yes, always. The gist of my conversations with the ICPC, with Natan Obed, and indeed across our government, including with, for example, Minister Galmasti, Minister Alti, Minister Chartrand, has been to ensure that the rollout of our Arctic strategy will always involve a focus on Indigenous voices, as well as ensuring that the economic benefits that will no doubt accrue as we work towards 3.5%, this is the work that's ongoing, will include work with Indigenous peoples. And we recently appointed an Arctic ambassador, Virginia Mearns, and she's been doing a wonderful job making sure that we have those liaisons in place. Dual-use infrastructure is going to bring economic benefits to the North. The Prime Minister has been clear about that. And indeed, having Indigenous voices at the table, and Inuit in particular, is going to be very important. And I'd like to thank all of the Inuit who have been working with us on this strategy. I've had a number of meetings with them, including in Nuuk, Greenland, when they came to see the raising of the Canadian flag in Nuuk. I'd like to thank them for coming and also for the engagement.
And I would just note that today in the House, we recognize members of the Canadian Armed Forces, including Rangers. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very good. I'm probably out of time. 15 seconds. Well, I would just say thank you for your work, and thank you for your team that supports us here at this committee so often with so many questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Oliphant. We go next to Monsieur Duceppe. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Madame.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Minister. Thank you for being with us today. I wanted to come back to the agreement with Taiwan. I spoke to some of your team, and I was wondering if the government was afraid of offending Beijing, and I did not receive an answer when I spoke to your team. So a year later, you mentioned different trade agreements in your opening remarks, and I would like to know, is it because you're afraid of offending Beijing that you're not signing an agreement with Taiwan?
Sure, if the member is aware, and I thank him for the question, but we have recently made sure that we resolve certain trade tensions with China for the benefit of adding billions of dollars to Canada's agricultural sector. And at the same time, we are also pursuing our policy relating to defense and security. And you will have seen that the Department of National Defense oversaw a sail-through of the Taiwan Strait. And the reflection here is that the Government of Canada is pursuing a number of policy initiatives at the same time on the economy, ensuring that we're unlocking economic advantages, for example, for the canola
Merci, Madame la
industry,
Vous
but
répondez
at
pas à
the
ma
same
question.
time ensuring that the
Thank you,
defense
Minister.
security and our
Madame la
view that
Ministre,
the
Vous répondez pas à ma
Indo-Pacific
question.
is free and open.
Madam Minister, you're not answering my question. I understand that you're good at not answering the question and wasting time, and that's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate for the democracy. I asked you a clear question. No, Stephen, please. I only have 6 minutes. We can't speak to the minister's intentions that way. This better not take from my time.
Preempted me. You can, of course, ask questions, but to
Oui.
try to impugn on the
OK,
intentions
parfait.
of the minister.
Merci
is a
beaucoup,
little
Monsieur le
bit-
Président. Madame la ministre, qui a demandé au...
Minister, who asked the two Liberal members to leave Taiwan when Mr. Carney was in Beijing? Was it you?
Merci encore pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Our members of parliament can travel throughout the world. Our foreign affairs are sovereign.
Is not dictated by any other nation.
OK, donc il n'y a personne qui a demandé à ces députés-là.
So those MPs left on their own behalf? Would you swear on a Bible? Nobody asked them to leave?
As I said, l'indépendance du Parlement est
Parliament's independence is a pillar of Canadian democracy. Members of Parliament and senators have always been able to travel throughout the world. They can do that. They can travel where they like. Thank you. So nobody from government asked them to leave. That is your answer. Minister, you tabled C-35 on forced labor recently. There are certain good elements. You kept a lot of proposals from the bloc Bill 251 on forced labor. There were a lot of reports, and one from the Sheffield University that says that there is forced labor in the supply chain of Chinese EVs. The bill will give you the power to include products on the list of products that should be banned, and they need to receive an assessment regarding forced labor. And we have heard that there is forced labor in the supply chain for these EVs. Can you confirm to the committee that when C-35 is adopted, you will include EVs, Chinese EVs, on this list? Especially given the agreement signed by Prime Minister Carney and Xi Jinping. Thank you for the question. I cannot confirm what goods will be on the list. We have already tabled the bill that was done last Friday. And now we're going to have the necessary discussions throughout the country. We'll speak to stakeholders and other groups in order to hear their perspectives. And then in the fall, during the next session, we will have a list. And then we will come back to this committee in order to discuss it. Yes, we're eager to see it. At that time, I will be able to discuss who will be on the list and who isn't. Thank you. So if we can see that EVs require forced labor in their supply chain, will you put those EVs on the list of products that are banned in Canada?
That forced labor for any product or good is already prohibited under Canadian law. We have laws from 2020, 2024 that specifically prohibit forced labor in the supply chain. Bill C-35 provides additional tools to CBSA to ensure that any good that is made by forced labor does not enter the country, period.
Thank you very much.
Merci,
Next,
Madame
we
la
go to MP Rood. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister, for being here today. Minister, your government just announced another $100 million for Gaza and the West Bank, on top of more than $500 million already sent since late 2023. In fact, you issued flexible and unearmarked funding without Canadian controls a day after the UN fired 70 workers for deep ties to Hamas terrorists. We've seen multiple reports of Canadian aid being directed to, stolen, or controlled by Hamas in the past. How can you guarantee taxpayers that none of this money will end up in the hands of terrorists or be redirected by the Palestinian Authority to support Hamas operations? And can you let us know how safeguards failed to allow Canadian aid to support Hamas?
I thank the honourable member for the question. I want to specifically reinforce a very important point. The Government of Canada does not tolerate any misuse or diversion of international assistance. We work with experienced humanitarian partners. We work to deliver life-saving assistance, and partners are required to maintain strong internal controls. In addition to those internal controls, my department carries out enhanced due diligence, and any partner receiving Government of Canada money is thoroughly vetted. And I want to specifically underline with regards to Hamas, we have repeatedly said, and I will underscore it here today, Hamas should play no part in the future government of Palestine, and Hamas should demilitarize, and in no way does this government associate itself with Hamas. I have my officials here if you'd like to have questions answered on the due diligence process.
Minister, respectfully, in the past 5 years, your own numbers show that Canada has sent over $11 billion in aid to dozens of countries that are under Canadian sanctions or with terrible human rights records. And I have an order paper question to prove it, so you can't deny this. It's OPQ 328. This paints a picture that Canadian taxpayer dollars are being laundered through bilateral and multilateral projects to regions under sanctions. So why are you issuing this funding?
Canada has had a long-standing foreign policy, or part of our foreign policy, dedicated to humanitarian aid. If you look at Cuba, if you look at Lebanon, if you look at Gaza, if you look at Sudan, there is a clear line that is supporting our values and Canadians' values relating to humanitarian aid. And on the integrity of the aid, I do take issue with the point that our due diligence is not effective. We take every precaution to ensure that our aid reaches civilians and that the due diligence process before it is delivered is functional, is rigorous, it contains oversight, and is upheld to the highest standards. These safeguards are the cornerstone of our approach, and I would ask Madame Carruthers if she'd like to add to that particular response.
Yes, certainly. In terms of some of the development assistance that has gone to some of the countries that you are alluding to, I can just say that in some cases it has actually flown through multilateral organizations. And so countries such as India, China, for example, they are eligible for development assistance under the ODA Act. And so
Sorry, my time is very short. Minister, shouldn't the compassion start at home with the people who built and defended this country? I believe Canadians deserve that transparency before we send another cent to anyone who does not directly contribute to our country. So I'm asking, will you commit to a full public audit of all Canadian aid funding so that we can know exactly where every dollar went and proof that it hasn't benefited terrorists, corrupt foreign officials, or been siphoned away into bureaucracies abroad?
Mr. Chair, with great respect to the honourable member, I do not accept the premise of the question. We will not apologize for helping people both at home and abroad.
Minister, my question was, will you commit to a full public audit of all Canadian aid funding so that we know exactly where every dollar went and proof that it hasn't benefited terrorists or corrupt foreign officials or hasn't been siphoned away into bureaucracies abroad?
Actually, part of my continuing to appear at committee, part of the supplementary estimates process, part of the work that the Treasury Board of Canada does before it releases any funds is to ensure that that very due diligence process occurs. I know this as previous president of the Treasury Board. Numerous times I sat around that table to ensure that the accountability, the due diligence relating to taxpayer dollars was being undertaken. All funding is subject to rigorous vetting, and as Minister, I have doubled down on the importance of being prudent with Canadian taxpayer
But Minister,
dollars.
why should
Thank you. Thank you.
Canadians
Sorry,
trust our
we're out of
government?
time. Next, MP Clark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and everyone for being here. And I just, off the top, I would say that I think Canada's history of foreign aid and multilateral support has been something that, as a country, we should be incredibly proud of, and is something that I think continues to save lives around the world, and is a real testament to our nation's history, culture, and influence around the globe. So I just wanted to say that. Minister, you mentioned in your opening comments a couple of times the phrase principled pragmatism, and I think that an effective foreign policy is a coherent foreign policy. So I think I'm just curious how you see that framing, principled pragmatism. Do you see that as kind of a cornerstone of Canada's foreign policy, and how does it trickle down to practical levels so that the tactics follow the strategy?
So it is helpful to talk about the frame of our foreign policy given how many specific and detailed questions are arising in this committee appearance. So thank you for raising that. The foreign policy that we are executing today is a direct response to the very volatile geopolitical environment and the fact that multilateral institutions that we have traditionally relied upon for our prosperity are not functioning as they had. And the gist of the Prime Minister's speech in Davos and subsequent work that we've been doing, building on that framework, is to exemplify that while we are pragmatic, while we have signed 20 security, defense, and economic agreements on 5 continents over the past year, we are continuing to uphold the principles that have long been a part of our foreign policy. I spent the last response talking about humanitarian assistance. In the last year alone, when you look at our humanitarian aid to populations that are incredibly vulnerable, starving, or oppressed, you will see that commitment to our values, to our principles being upheld. And indeed, I laid out some of these values in my speech to the United Nations on September 29th last year. The idea that we will stand for environmental sustainability, we will stand for gender equality, we will stand for reconciliation, we will stand for humanitarian aid. In fact, that's a set of principles that largely defines much of the work in our government. And I think many of us would say, while we are pragmatic, we will always stay true to those principles. And indeed, Bill C-35 reflects the principle that we hold dearly, that there should not be slavery in supply chains, and we will not accept goods into this country if they are made as a result of exploitation in the supply chain.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. And I think another theater or example where we've seen this come to life, of course, is our support for Ukraine. You know, I don't have all the numbers at hand, but I'm sure Canada has been one of the largest per capita contributors to Ukraine over the last handful of years. I know just in the last 24 hours, I saw the Prime Minister with President Zelensky in France as well. So, Minister, could you just give us, in the minute or so we have remaining, a bit of an update on what we're doing to continue to support Ukraine and what we hope to see over the next 6 to 12 months to continue the great work that we've done?
So this is a good question that focuses on work that has been ongoing in the Government of Canada since 2015 with Operation Unifier, whereby members of the Canadian Armed Forces have trained approximately 47,000 members of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. That is part of the work we're doing. Layer on top of that the work over the past 4.5 years since the illegal and unjustifiable further invasion by Russia of Ukraine. We've put forward approximately $25.5 billion in multiple forms of aid. That would be financial, economic, and military aid, for example. On top of that, we are also working with civil society in countries around the world relating to the return of Ukrainian children. We are the co-hosts of that effort internationally. I've just, in the recent past, returned from Brussels, where we had a very large gathering of countries supporting the return of Ukrainian children who've been indoctrinated, who've been kidnapped, who've been taken by Russia during the war. And there's more work to be done to bring the Ukrainian children home to their families. We will be hosting another such summit here in Canada, in Toronto, on September 29th and 30th, and we very much hope that members of our government and beyond will be able to attend. It is extremely important, not just for Ukrainians, but for the principle of democracy writ large.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank MP James Bazan from the Conservative Caucus, in fact, with whom we have been working over the past number of years to ensure that there's a unified message going forward for Ukrainians in Canada.
Okay. Next is Mr. Duceppe. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que Madame la
Thank you, Chair. Minister, would you say that nobody ordered Ms. Jezik and another MP to shorten their trip in Taiwan in 2026?
Not to my knowledge.
OK, parfait, merci. Est-ce que vous êtes en mesure de dire...
Thank you. Can you tell the committee how much the cuts were for international aid in the recent budget?
Juste le montant. La question est simple.
Just the number amount, please. It's a simple question.
OK, donc 2,7 milliards de dollars qui ont été coupés.
2.7 billion in cuts in international aid. And yesterday, UNICEF was at the Human Rights Committee, and they said that they can't do more with less. So when you say that we can do better with less, that's not true. We can only do less with less. So how do you explain that you are going to be spending in defense and you are making cuts of $2.7 billion in international aid, and NGOs and other groups that are working on international assistance or humanitarian aid are saying that that's terrible? What do you have to say to those NGOs?
Well, I thank the honourable member for the question. C'est très important de continuer de...
It's important to continue to say that we have a program for humanitarian aid. We will be continuing to diversify our supply chains. We were elected on a platform that Canadians want. They want a more efficient government, and we will be able to strike a balance and meet our goals.
We are operating our programs at 85% capacity. 85% of our work is continuing. We were elected on a mandate to render government more efficient. And so that's exactly what we're doing while providing humanitarian aid, while supporting NGOs and international organizations, and while ensuring that the work we're doing across government is as efficient as possible. And I'd like to underline finally that there have been no cuts to our humanitarian budget.
Thank you very much. Before I move to the next questioner, I just wanted to get unanimous consent from colleagues. We have a vote in 28 minutes, and I wanted to get your consent so that we can continue the meeting. Is that agreeable? Okay. Next is MP Michael Chong. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I'd like to talk a little bit about Canada-U.S. relations. And, Mexico is currently and formally and publicly announced a table on the review of CUSMA. When is Canada going to formally start a table to review CUSMA?
So I believe as we speak, Minister LeBlanc, the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, will be meeting shortly with his counterpart, Jameson Greer, the ambassador to trade from the United States. It is the work of Minister LeBlanc as well as our chief negotiator, Janice Charette, to ensure that this dialogue is continuing with the United States. I want to underline also that we do have this CUSMA, this trade agreement in place. 85% of Canada-U.S. trade continues to operate and pass through the 49th parallel tariff-free. And the work that they will do is to continue that cooperation while advocating for those who are suffering in the sectoral tariff domain, in particular steel, aluminum, lumber, and auto. As I said, this work is ongoing and it's extremely important.
So you can't tell us give us any idea when the tables are going to be started? Because Mexico is currently at formal tables that have been established between Mexico and the United States. Canadians have no idea when formal tables are going to be established, what date they start on. It's creating a great deal of uncertainty in the business community and amongst Canadian workers. So do we have any idea on when these tables, either tables on the review of CUSMA or tables on bilateral irritants such as Section 232 tariffs, are going to be established? What date?
As I said, the discussions with the Americans in the formal channels, with the chief negotiator, with the minister responsible, have been ongoing.
My question isn't about
the work that they will continue to do is to advocate for the 232
My question isn't about
tariffs.
discussions, isn't about phone calls, isn't about meetings. My question is, when are the formal tables going to be established? On what date will they start? If you don't have a precise date, perhaps you give the committee a bit of a sense of what month they're going to start in, because Mexico has started formal tables.
Mr. Chair, I'm sure my honourable colleague is aware that my purview is different from the Minister for Canada-U.S. trade. It is not unusual for bilateral discussions between each parties to move at a different pace.
Understand.
And in
So we don't have
meantime, I will continue to work with Minister LeBlanc as well as with my counterpart in Mexico to build the bilateral relationship
I understand.
there.
Okay, so we don't have any guidance about when the tables will be established. That's clear. I have a question now about the overall approach of the Government of Canada as expressed by the Prime Minister and other ministers of the government. You know, I was interested to read several weeks ago about the government now pushing Fortress North America and tighter integration of the Canadian and American economies. This is something the Prime Minister talked about in New York recently. He also talked about Canada Strong, making America great again. It seems to be a very different approach than the approach of a year ago when it was about countervailing tit for tat. It was about the relationship with the U.S. being over, and so on and so forth. Can you tell us why the change in approach on bilateral relations and what the thinking behind that is?
Well, I differ with you to some extent in that the United States remains Canada's largest trading partner, the most significant market for many businesses, and over 70% of Canadian businesses continue to choose the United States as their first export destination. Geography matters. We're fully cognizant that the reliance and the work that Canadian companies are going to be doing will involve the relationship with the United States. Look at defense, for example. We have a situation where much of the defense industry is integrated with their U.S. counterparts. And so recognizing that the U.S. remains Canada's largest trading partner, we have to move forward in ways that are cooperative. And my work with Secretary Rubio will be and continue to be outside of the trade relationship per se, how we are building our bilateral ties. And in fact, that work we're doing together on the Arctic is one example. I will be traveling to Anchorage this summer to open a Canadian consulate in Anchorage. I've discussed this with Secretary Rubio, and again, we're on the same page about the need to work together for Arctic security and protection. So there is work being done with the Americans, and I will say we have to be fully cognizant of that relationship overall in sectors within the trade context and outside.
Thank you very much. MP Fortier, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Ministre, d'être.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for being with us today. I will take a moment to thank the officials, especially in this National Public Service Week. I know that you are all very active, and same goes for those who work for government and global affairs. I would like to now talk about Haiti. You mentioned Haiti in your opening remarks, and I have a short question regarding Canada and La Francophonie. As you mentioned, the government invested more than $450 million in bilateral aid and in humanitarian assistance and in multilateral funding. The government, under your leadership, has been focused on efforts for the implementation of the repression of gangs, and that's supported by the United Nations, and it shows a commitment to the Haitian community. We want their safety and their sovereignty, and that is what they want as well. I know that you work closely with allies and contributing countries, for example, El Salvador, Chad, Bangladesh, Guatemala, the Ivory Coast, and you have focused on operations and humanitarian aid. You'll be at the annual assembly of the Organization of American States in Panama next week. Can you speak to the next steps? Because you are probably working to have more allies and to advance the work of that force that is working to repress gangs, and how you are working on rebuilding Haiti as well.
Merci beaucoup, comme toujours, pour votre travail.
Thank you again for your hard work, and thank you, Mr. Oliphant, as well. But we're going to continue our efforts. We will ensure that we are there to support Haiti and the Haitian people, given the instability in the region. things have been unstable for a long time. Since 2022, we have invested more than $460 million. We are hoping that elections will be organized as soon as possible. Canada is ready to support the Haitian people in its return to stability.
From the last question about working with the United States and how that affects our foreign policy, I will say that Secretary Rubio and I have been working together on gathering international funds for Haiti. And this work dates back to last summer, where we began discussion about Canada's support for a UNSC resolution. I met with Secretary Rubio a few times leading up to the UN General Assembly week. We together worked on that resolution, and then after that was passed, we continued to advocate within the G7 and beyond for other countries to step up with financial aid for security and stability in Haiti. And so when I was in Doha, for example, I spoke with the Qataris about supporting Haiti. They came forward with funding. When I was at the G7, I spoke with my counterparts there about supporting Haiti. Germany actually stepped up with funding for Haiti. And so this is a moment where if we wish to continue to see democracy and stability thrive and exist, we need to work together as like-minded countries. And it's not just one country, it's regional stability. And I'll be traveling to CARICOM next week in Panama. I will be co-hosting a meeting avec plusieurs homologues sur...
I'll be meeting with counterparts, and we will be speaking about regional stability.
Economic recovery has to be the stability of institutions within a country, and that is very much the center of the conversation that we will have in Panama next week.
Puis rapidement, vous allez probablement pas pouvoir répondre, mais
And briefly, perhaps an update on Canada's candidature for the Francophonie Summit for 2028 in the National Capital Region, more specifically in the Ottawa-Vanier-Gloucester riding. I hope that we will be receiving that nomination.
Moi aussi, c'est crucial de...
It is essential to continue our efforts, and thank you for yours. It would be important to host that event. It will be here in the NCR. It's an important moment for Canada. It's a moment for all of us to be on the same page regarding the importance of La Francophonie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, I want to go back to trying to understand the government's foreign policy direction. The Prime Minister has recently said two things. I mentioned one thing he mentioned earlier, which was that he supported building Fortress North America. More recently, he has said that he believes the next world order will likely be built out of Europe. If the next world order is being built out of Europe, and we're in Fortress North America, how does that work? So, in other words, are we seeking closer ties with Europe, or are we seeking closer ties building Fortress North America? It just seems to me to be incongruous. Maybe you could explain to our committee, where is the government going on all of this?
Sure, I'd love to respond to that, and thank the member for always the constructive conversation. There is nothing inconsistent with seeking to diversify our trading relationships, and that's exactly what is happening here. We have a strong trading relationship with the United States. We need to address sectoral tariffs, 232s, as you said, and we will continue to do that through the negotiation process, through the dialogue, through the discussions. At the same time, we can diversify trading partners while maintaining existing relationships. And so those 20 agreements struck over the past year in security, defense, and the economy, extremely important. The work we are doing with the EU as being the only non-EU member of SAFE, another example of diversification. The diversification doesn't just rest on those particular points. Let's look at ASEAN. We're looking to conclude an FTA in 2026. Let's look at Mercosur also, working to ensure that we have an FTA there. And even last year, concluding an FTA with Indonesia. Over and above FTAs, it's foreign direct investment. We are having an investment summit here in September. The Prime Minister has received commitments of up to $100 billion in foreign direct investment. And for foreign affairs, in terms of the work that we are doing internationally, I've directed our officials to ensure that two-way trade, foreign direct investment be at the very top of the agenda that will ensure that we double non-U.S. trade over the next 10 years.
Thank you for that. But I would just note that despite all the fanfare about traveling around the world and trying to attract foreign investment, the reality is that according to Statistics Canada's May 29th release, in which they stated that business capital investment in Canada declined 0.7% last quarter, the fifth consecutive quarterly decline. None of this seems to be working. Business capital investment is in fact declining, notwithstanding foreign investment flows. And so I just want to make that point. But I go back to the earlier point. It just seems to be somewhat contradictory to build Fortress North America, which implies a tariff wall around North America, and then try to further diversify trade in the Indo-Pacific region and in Europe. And I would point to the fact that, today it's been reported that the Prime Minister was talking to President Trump about the 49,000 electric vehicles that the government has decided will be admitted to Canada at a much reduced tariff. So that seems to me to be an example of the incongruity between building Fortress North America and at the same time agreeing to allow 49,000 EVs manufactured in the PRC into Canada. So again, it seems to be a contradiction. And I think what I've been reading, some European allies are actually questioning how Fortress North America is consistent with diversifying trade with the European Union.
Mr. Chair, allow me the time to respond to this question. There is no contradiction between growing the Canadian economy, doubling non-U.S. trade over the next 10 years by diversifying our trade relationships, including with Europe, and ensuring that Canadian businesses have markets south of the 49th parallel. Our responsibility as a government is to grow the Canadian economy at a moment when the geopolitical order, and in particular the world trading order that has been at the heart of Canada's prosperity for decades, are being completely rewired. And so, again, there is no incongruity between ensuring that we have a strong relationship with the United States and Mexico and diversifying non-U.S. trade, including with Europe, including with the ASEAN, including with Mercosur, including in the Gulf region from which I just returned, and the list goes on. We will double non-U.S. trade. We will bring home $1 trillion of investment, $100 billion of which the Prime Minister has already received a commitment for. This is work that is pragmatic. It is not automatic, but it will continue, and we will deliver for Canadians and the Canadian economy.
Thank you, Minister. Mrs. Sari? You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Et merci beaucoup à Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being with us, and thank you to your team. You talked about 5 continents for diplomatic partnerships, and I appreciated that. But I would like for us to focus on one and focus on Africa. I would like to start with humanitarian assistance. As you know, Minister, there are safety issues and food safety issues in the region and issues related to climate change. My first question for you is as follows. Can you speak to the efforts undertaken by the government regarding those issues? So that's my first question. Second, Africa doesn't have only issues, it can also represent business and diplomatic opportunities. Can you speak to potential partnerships that we could have with the African continent?
La question, bien sûr.
Thank you for the question. As you know, we have a strategy for Africa. Thank you, Mr. Oliphant, for the work that you have done on that file. On the strategy for Africa, we will continue to build relationships with countries there. We will continue implementing our strategy for Africa as well. This means that we will have multilateral partnerships, the African Union, for example, in order to support their leadership. This is not only focused on humanitarian aid. We will have another level of our strategy. We're going to have dialogue on economic ties. Africa benefits from international aid, but Africa is also a continent that includes very rich countries, rich in natural resources, for example. And so we will continue to target sectors that would be beneficial for Canada and African countries. I will be visiting Africa in the coming weeks, and I will continue building our economic relationship with Africa. Countries there are powerhouses, and we are going to continue looking for opportunities to diversify our supply chains and to have agreements with African nations. And now for climate change. They impact a lot of countries, and Africa as well. And you mentioned the natural resources opportunities. So how can we strike a balance between fighting climate change while looking for new investments? As I mentioned, we have values in our foreign affairs. For example, climate change. And so in our approaches, in our policies with different countries, we discuss how we can raise the importance of climate change and fighting climate change, and also promoting our values such as being against forced labor. We are able to discuss many issues at the same time. A final question that comes back to the question asked by Ms. Fortier regarding la francophonie. The African continent has a strong francophone presence. How do you see your future collaboration, and how can we benefit and have how can we support la francophonie? As you know, I'm from Quebec, and that's why I would like to bring up this important issue, and we should welcome these African countries. We can think to the Prime Minister's speech in Davos, the importance of multilateralism, the importance of middle powers and working together. It's the same for La Francophonie. It's a multilateral organization. Many states speak French, just like Canada. And that is why we want to host La Francophonie, because we are like them. We are multilateral. We speak French and English. We are bilingual. And we have a population that wants to be on the global stage and speaking their official languages. And so that's part of our policies, and we are going to continue to look for ways to work with other middle powers in order to help Canadians. We need to recognize that there will be many economic benefits as well. It's important to work together on that. Thank you.
Minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Vous allez me trouver fatigant.
Thank you. You might be tired of hearing from me, but I'm going to come back to the question I asked you earlier. You said, not to my knowledge, when I asked you about whether or not there was pressure from the government on Ms. Lalonde, Ms. Jezik to come back to the country. You said, not to my knowledge. That's what you said. You could read the blues if you want. Ms. Jezik and Ms. Lalonde stated that they were coming back to Canada early following advice of the government in order to avoid any issues with the government's policy. So what you're saying is the Minister of Foreign Affairs is not aware of comments made by two MPs who spoke to the foreign policy of Canada. There's one thing that I hate, Madam Minister, and I don't like being made fun of or being laughed at. So you're saying that you were not aware that they said that those two MPs were told by government to return to Canada and to shorten their trip. Do you maintain what you said earlier?
First of all, I want to say that I value the contributions of my honourable colleague, and in no way am I undermining or making light of your question. It's fully within the process of the committee for you to raise questions of concern to you, and that's exactly what I'm underlying that I have respect for. My answer remains on the record. I had no conversations with those members, and I will simply say.
Madame la ministre, pas ça la question. La question, c'est est-ce que vous êtes
Madam Minister, that wasn't the question. My question was whether or not you are aware of pressure from the government to make them come home. You can answer by yes or no. Earlier you said, not to my knowledge. Do you maintain what you said earlier?
I stand by what I said, and I will also say that the principle that I have continuously operated under, that I have expressed at this committee today, is that parliamentarians
Elles ont fait une
have the
déclaration.
ability to decide where they are traveling, and
Elles ont fait une déclaration.
they will.
But they made a speech on that, and you're not aware of it?
Quoi,
Ask
ça?
my question.
You're trying to make me believe that you weren't aware?
Support to those MPs when they are traveling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your appearance today and for answering our questions. We will now briefly suspend to prepare for our next panel with officials as well as vote. Thank you. Suspend.
Thank you so much.
I call this meeting to order. I would like to welcome the officials for the next half hour. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we have Shirley Caruthers, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, People and Corporate Management Branch. Thank you for staying with us. We also have Cam Do, Director General, Development Finance Bureau. We also have David Hutchison, Director General, Trade Strategy Bureau. And we have Emmanuel Lamoureux, Director General, Strategy Bureau. We will now continue with questions from members, beginning with Mr. Abul Taif. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for, sorry to keep you waiting, by the way. The time is running. On the estimate of Vote 10 grants and contributions, there will be less money available into that category. For the sake of the committee, can you tell us what Vote 10 includes and how this is going to affect your operation in general?
Thank you very much for that question. So under our Vote 10, we have a number of different programs. I think we have 19 programs overall, but our biggest program is our international development assistance, where, of course, the biggest portion of our reductions from the comprehensive expenditure review will take place. And so just in terms of our overall development budget and the impact, what you'll see moving forward is that our overall reference level, or the amount of budget that we have within the department, will actually return to pre-COVID levels. So since COVID, our international development assistance budget had increased quite dramatically. And so as part of the $2.7 billion that I referenced earlier for the reduction of our overall development budget, that is where you'll see the biggest impact.
In about 30 to 33% reduction, and you said that you bring in to the pre-COVID. Where was the $2 billion that you'll be missing were spent, so you're able to cut them?
So the reductions that we made in the comprehensive expenditure review were mostly in the area of health and global health programming. And so, again, this was an area where our contributions have grown disproportionately over the years, just in terms of our overall investments. In addition, we will need to make some other modest reductions within some of our other programming. For example, some of the funding will be reduced to international financial institutions. Obviously, with a cut of this magnitude, we'll also have to decrease our bilateral programming. This is something that we actually visit routinely, just in terms of the level of programming within all of our different countries. And we do some alignments based on different country priorities, local contexts, and shifts. So we will see some reductions in that space as well.
Will you be able to go into more details about which programs were affected the most? And also you mentioned FinDev in a way. Mm-hmm. And the question, of course, is how much FinDev have achieved, how much money you spent on FinDev, and how this is going to basically impact the whole program. And is this an attempt or a chance that the FinDev will be done, will be gone? They won't be there anymore? I mean, I like to go into more details on this rather than a generic answer.
Sure, no problem. So just with respect to FinDev, one thing that I can mention is that we've recently there was a recent budget announcement for $5.3 billion for climate finance. Within this portion of money, some of that funding will come to global affairs. Another portion will actually go to FinDev, so an additional $2 billion. So this is outside of the actual comprehensive expenditure review.
The cuts on, you mentioned healthcare or in the healthcare area, it does affect certain partners. Are some of these partners being affected completely? I mean, are we cutting off, let's say, some partners completely? Because we're talking about a large sum of money here.
Yeah, we are. So one of the principles that we had when we were looking at reductions across the development portfolio was not to cut any of our existing programs. So it is possible that when some of these programs come to a natural end, that they won't be renewed. So in that aspect, eventually some partners that are currently receiving funding won't be receiving funding in the future. But again, we did take a very deliberate decision not to cut any of our existing projects that we have ongoing with certain organizations. And then again, as I mentioned, right now we're actually programming our development assistance within 50 different countries. So obviously with the reduced budget, we will need to recalibrate or focus our development assistance in fewer countries.
Is the department convinced that some of the programs were not effective, or we can go along without them? And can you be specific on those programs that they will be experiencing severe cuts, and what are they?
Brief response, please, because we're running out.
So again, I think that the sector that will be the most impacted will be health. Just in terms of in previous iterations, it was one of our biggest sectors or areas that we were contributing funding. So that would be one thing that I could offer. But
thank you. Thank you very much. Next is MP Stephen Guilbeault. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses, and happy Public Service Week to those who are with us. I would like to come back to that climate fund that you mentioned, and for the benefit of committee members. It's about $5.9 billion, I believe, that was announced in the economic statement. About $3 billion for global affairs, 2 for FinDev. So 2 questions. Those are additional amounts to the development assistance. And if you look at the numbers, and if I remember, Great Britain reduced its climate assistance by about 25%, and for France about 37%. So if you could give committee members information on that. And my last question, it's the first time that we are setting a goal of using private funding for fighting climate change in developing countries. And so if you could also give information to the committee on those elements as well, that would be great. Thank you.
And so just in terms of the funding that I referenced, the $5.3 billion that we received, so this would be in line with our previous 5-year commitment for climate change. So between 2021 and 2026, we also had a 5-year commitment for climate change of $5.3 billion that was shared between Global Affairs Canada, ECCC. I will hand it over to my colleague Cam Doe, who can provide some additional information just with respect to the overall commitment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So on the $5.3 billion, FinDev got an additional $2 billion that's recapitalized by EDC, then an additional $732 million of concessional facility. That's just an extension of the current concessional facility that they have. And yes, there is a new target to mobilize private capital. So for every dollar that public investment is put in from Canada, $3 will be mobilized. And yes, this is additional funding to the current ODA budget. And yes, both Great Britain and France reduced significantly their climate finance. So Canada is really holding its own by maintaining this amount. Thank you.
Et merci pour ces réponses. Et si je me souviens bien.
Thank you. If I remember correctly, that announcement on climate funding was talked about by Canadian NGOs and international NGOs. We talked about FinDev. And to come back to Mr. Albutaev's question, could you perhaps speak to the Gaia Fund, a fund that was launched by FinDev in 2024? And if I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, investments of $75 million from the federal government, and to have $1.5 million to support developing countries, for countries that are currently seeking potential changes. If you could give information to the committee, please.
Much. I'll once again ask Camdo to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this was very well received, this $5.3 billion announcement by both Canadian NGOs as well as international NGOs. On Gaia itself, yes, you're correct. We put in $75 million, and it mobilized $1.5 billion. And it's a very unique fund because it's the first time that the fund is really focused on adaptation. It has a target of 70%, and it's also working with the Mitsubishi company. Thank you.
Il me reste combien de temps, Monsieur le Président?
How much time do I have left, Chair?
Très rapidement, si vous pourriez partager.
Briefly, if you may share with the committee how developing countries reacted to the announcement of the Gaia Fund, that would be very relevant. Thank you.
I don't have the answer to that right now, but I think in general, it's very well received because adaptation is a key thematic for developing countries, especially Africa.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go to the next question, I just wanted to remind members to keep their phones away from the microphones. It causes issues for the interpreters, please. Thank you. We go next to Mr. Mantle. You have 5 minutes.
Ce serait gentil que vous me donniez la parole, Monsieur le Président. Je comprends que des fois, je peux être...
I think that you're giving me the floor.
An opportunity after Madame Fortier.
Monsieur Guilbeault vient de faire... À moins que Monsieur Guilbeault soit passé chez les conservateurs, là...
Unless Mr. Guilbeault is a conservative, I don't think that that's the case. Mr. Al-Boutaïf had his 6 minutes. Mr. Guilbeault had his 6 minutes. Now it's my 6 minutes, is it not?
Yes,
Même si on a changé de panel.
it was
Even if we
yourself,
change panels?
Mr. Al-Boutaïf, and then Mr. Guilbeault. Now it's Mr. Mantle, Madame Fortier, and then yourself.
OK, c'est pas un nouveau panel.
This is not a new panel?
The speaking order.
Ah,
Yeah, that's why.
intéressant.
C'est pourquoi. Okay. So, Mr. Mantle, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our officials for being here, providing valuable testimony. The Minister spoke at some length in her statement on issues around forced labor, so I'm going to focus my questions on those. I'll let you decide who is best placed to answer those questions. Could you tell me when the first draft of Bill C-35 was completed and sent to the Minister's office for review?
I'll hand this one over to my colleague, David Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, I don't have information on that, but we would be pleased to provide that to the committee at a later date.
Thank you. I would appreciate it that a written response would be more than sufficient. Can you tell us what goods will be on the list of goods that will be placed under deemed reasonable suspicion for production by forced labor?
Mr. Chair, I'm not...
Point of order. I don't believe that this is actually in the estimates or the subs that we are discussing today. I think it's quite out of scope for what our study is, and the officials are not the officials that would be preparing legislation. They're related to the work that we are mandated to do in today's effort. So I do not believe that this is within in what we should be doing today.
I'll give
Mr.
Mr. Mantle the opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the same point of order, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has been designated as one of the ministers responsible for Bill C-35. She spoke at great length on Canada's approach and response to forced labor. I assume the ministers the officials are prepared to answer questions based on what the minister has provided to the committee, so I believe it's properly in scope.
Yeah. I'll continue.
Thank you. I had paused my time at about 57 seconds, so I'll continue. If you could answer my previous question.
Mr. Chair, as the legislation has just been tabled, not as a public servant, I'm not in a position to comment on what may or may not be included in the implementation of that legislation.
Fair enough. In your view as officials for the ministry, do you have goods that you're concerned about? Obviously, our prohibition has been enforced for several years, about 5 years now. Are there goods that would be concerning to you? Let me give you some examples. Are you concerned about polysilicon from China?
Mr. Chair, I'm personally not responsible for the forced labor file. I don't have expertise to share on that. There have been previous publications by the Government of Canada related to forced labor and various items of risk. The committee may wish to refer to those publications.
Thanks for that. I'm interested in the ministry's perspective as the officials who will be providing advice. I presume in the creation of this list, there's we've been having an import prohibition on
point of
labor
order. This legislation is at first reading. It will come to second reading. The House of Commons will have a chance to debate it at second reading and may choose to refer it to a committee. It will come to this committee, so then this committee will have an opportunity to have those questions answered with officials who are prepared to answer those questions. But at this point, I do not believe that this is within the scope of this meeting.
And the official has made it clear that he's not the official responsible for this line of questioning. But again, I'm giving you an opportunity
on the same point of order, I would respectfully disagree with my colleague. The bill itself does not include the list. It's left to further regulatory making authority, so there won't be discussion on that specific list.
But if you have concerns about the bill and whether it's strong enough or not,
I'm responding to the minister's comments this afternoon. That's
sorry.
I'm engaging with the minister's comments she made to this committee this afternoon.
But the minister's not here. And the officials and the official has made it very clear that he's not the official.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Point
of order, Chair. Point of order. I have a point of order.
Finish what I was saying. The official has made it very clear that he's not the person responsible for this particular issue. So I'm just trying to think to move things along.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. You're saying the minister's not here, but you're saying that it's the same panel. I didn't get a speaking round. Just a minute.
I said the minister is not here, and the official has made it clear that he's not the official responsible for this line of questioning.
Sur le même point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président,
on the same point of order, Chair, if the minister was on the same official panel as the officials here, well, then my Conservative colleague has the right to ask the questions because it is the same panel. If you decide that it's a new panel, then it would have been my turn to speak, but you're saying that it's the same panel, and so the minister spoke to this issue, and I think that our colleague has the right to ask similar questions.
I allowed the first question, but the official then made it clear on the record that he is not the official responsible for this issue. Mr. Chong?
Yeah, I just want to speak to the issue of relevance because this is the second point of order on it, and I take your point about the witness not being the individual responsible for the subject matter at hand. But, generally, members of committees do not have specific rules governing the nature of questions that they could put to witnesses other than the general requirement of relevance. I think clearly this line of questioning is relevant. In fact, the minister herself, in her opening remarks, talked about the forced labor bill with respect to the estimates. That's why she's here. So I think it's entirely in order for a member of this committee to ask questions to witnesses about this. They may not be able to answer them, but I think it's entirely relevant.
I would ask the relevance related to our topic of our meeting is subject matter of main estimates 2026-27, votes 1, 5, 10, 15, and 20 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, vote 1 under the International Development Research Center, and vote 1 under the International Joint Commission. This legislation was introduced at first reading. It has nothing to do with these particular main estimates, and it will be very appropriate to discuss them when we do mains or subs when they actually related to these. But and I know that chairs, and I have been a chair of a committee, have given leeway on lines of questioning. However, I think it is an abuse of our committee time to spend time on something which we will have a responsibility to deal with if the House decides to pass it at second reading, and if and when they refer it to this committee, we'll have a lot of time. With respect to the list, there is no list, because the reality is we have vote, we have not voted at second reading even to continue the legislation. So how can there be a phantom list at this point when the legislation is not passed?
So I'm of the opinion that, like, I've given you leeway. I would hope that you would bring this to a close because, again, even if I were to allow you to continue this line of questioning, the official has made it clear that he's not the point person on this particular issue. So I'm trying to understand the line of questioning and the relevance.
I'd like to speak on the same in response to your comments and to Mr. Oliphant. I mean, I'm concerned that there's now reference to a phantom list. I would expect that after 5 years of enforcing this, there would be a list or some understanding of a list. I'm not asking them to give me every bullet point. I'm asking them for what they know as officials on this. I think it's very relevant to ask officials who are here to assist the minister in responding to the committee's questions, and the minister discuss this at length. How is that not relevant, Mr. Chair?
Well, and the official then responded to your question.
And I will proceed with my questioning, and if
Continue.
the official does not know, he or she is free to say so, and they are.
So
and then I
we'll
am free to
restart
ask
the
for more
time
information.
and continue. No, we stopped the clock because of the points of order.
I've got 2 minutes and 47 seconds.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Are we? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to the officials. You will be aware that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection publishes the UFLPA list, which is a list of designated entities under that U.S. law, as well as publicly issuing press releases about withhold release orders for the blocking of importation of goods that are suspected to be produced by forced labor. Does the Ministry of Foreign Affairs do the same?
Mr. Chair, Canada has forced labor legislation on the books, and a new piece of legislation has been tabled, which includes a proposal to publish a list.
The list, yes, but does the government currently, does your ministry or the government currently provide any data with respect to importations that have been blocked or detained for forced labor coming into Canada?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of Global Affairs Canada publishing any of that data. Enforcement of Canada's forced labor import prohibition rests with CBSA.
Thanks. I wanted to ask your officials, because the CBSA, of course, does not publish any of that data, so I was wondering if other government departments do. Just today, U.S. Customs and Border Protection issued a withhold release on a Serbian copper mine owned by a Chinese entity on its suspected use of forced labor at that mine. Public reporting says that those copper products are imported into Canada. Can you confirm for us today whether copper products produced by forced labor are in the Canadian market from this mine in Serbia?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any knowledge on that issue.
Would you could you undertake to review and write back to the committee on that issue?
Mr. Chair, to the extent to which Global Affairs Canada presently has any competency in that area, the department will follow up.
Thank you. I just remind everyone that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is being selected to be a responsible minister for this bill. Let me ask you another question. In September of last year, the U.S. CBP issued a withhold release order against Giant Bicycles, which are bicycles widely available in Canada, 2 stores in Ottawa, 3 in Toronto. To your knowledge, are bicycles that have been produced by forced labor currently in the Canadian market?
Mr. Chair, I have no knowledge on that issue.
Thank you very much. Next, we go to Madame Fautier. You have 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We know that in the estimates, we talked about functional review, and I believe that consular affairs are part of it. Can we speak to consular services that the government offers? These services are necessary and essential for Canadian travelers going abroad or even Canadian residents who are living abroad. If I understood correctly, we want to be a responsible and efficient government, and we need to modernize consular services in order to be more efficient. I would like to know if you could share your approach in order to modernize consular services and improve efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the initiatives that we actually did put forward within the context of the comprehensive expenditure review in order to achieve savings and find efficiencies was to modernize our consular services. So what this really entails is not reducing services to Canadians, but actually improving the way that we deliver our services. And going forward, or after the overall modernization project has been completed, we'll have a new digital service window. What this digital service window will do, it will allow Canadians to access services online. So say, for example, right now, services, folks would have to actually go into our embassies. And so going forward, it would be routine transactions that would be enabled through this new digital service window. So say, for example, if someone is abroad looking for consular services or assistance, perhaps they've lost their passport, they would be able to go online and better understand what steps are necessary in order for them to get their passport renewed. Of course, we know that there's more complex consular cases, and the hopes is that this new modern digital service window that we have will enable us to free up some resources. So in addition to those resources that we'll free up in terms of identifying savings within the reduction exercise, it'll also allow folks to have more time to concentrate on those more complex type consular cases. Thank you.
Justement, on parle de... j'ai le privilège de en voir.
I was able to see complex cases involving consular services. How do you see the future use of AI or digital services? It wouldn't necessarily replace services, in-person services that are necessary, but will there be a criteria to ensure that in-person services will be maintained, and for those that are offered through AI or digital services, how will you ensure that these complex cases are properly handled?
And so overall, again, just in terms of the overall modernization, so they will be enabled, as you mentioned, through AI, so conversational AI and web-based intake forms. There'll be automated triage and routing, and so those cases that are the most complex, obviously, there would be a piece of this. In terms of the overall complex cases, this isn't something that we're looking in terms of, having it to be provided through these digital kind of services. This would be something where we would have resources kind of freed up within our overall footprint of resources to be able to deal with those on an individual case basis.
Merci. Alors, parce que...
Thank you. This was a major concern, and it's important to be efficient, but we need to ensure that the service is maintained. I was able to travel to the Ivory Coast and see the embassy to see if they had the necessary resources, and we asked about digital services. There's not a lot of time left, so I would like to invite Canadians to register on Canada's travel website so that we can reach Canadians when there are problems throughout the world. It's important when you're traveling abroad.
Next is Monsieur Duceppe, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Hello. Thank you for being with us today. My first question, I don't have a lot of time. If there's a private member's bill that's tabled and it has to do with your department, when it's tabled, does your department analyze the bill regardless of the political allegiance?
Mr. Chair, of course, when a piece of legislation is tabled that's relevant to our department's mandate, experts in our department take a look at it.
OK, merci. Juste, j'ai pas beaucoup de temps.
Thank you. I don't have a lot of time, so you can just answer yes or no. C-251, that was tabled by my colleague Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay. Did you compare it to C-35? Are there any elements of 251 that can be found in C-35 that was tabled by the minister last Friday?
Mr. Chair, I'm not in a position to comment on how the legislation was prepared. I think those that were responsible took advantage of a number of resources available.
Concernant l'ocre, vous savez de quoi je parle?
Regarding ocre, which was scrapped, did your department recently emit any directives regarding the government's decision to remove that department?
Mr. Chair, from a departmental perspective, we're not in a position to comment on the decisions of the government and how those decisions were formed.
Non, mais je parle pas de comment la décision a été prise, mais
Not regarding how the decision was made, but I imagine that the government asks for advice. Is that not part of your tasks, to advise the government as officials? So I imagine before getting rid of the office of the Canadian Ombudsperson, did the government reach out, ask for advice? What was the advice that you gave the government?
Mr. Chair, there's an ongoing exchange of advice that is confidential with the minister, and we're not in a position to share that with the committee.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much for your appearance today. We will now briefly suspend to prepare the committee for clause by clause of Bill C-219. order. I call this meeting to order pursuant to the order of the reference of the House of Commons on Tuesday, February 24, 2026. The committee will now continue the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-219, an act to amend the Department of Foreign Affairs Trade and Development Act, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, in brackets Sergei Magnitsky Law, the Special Economic Measures Act, and the Broadcasting Act. I would like to welcome the officials who are with us from the Department of Canadian Heritage. Online. No, they're online. Yeah. Yes. Yes. From the yes. Okay, so she's not here. Okay, from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Robert Brookfield, Director General, Sanctions and Strategic Export Controls. Thank you, sir, for continuing to be here from the previous session. Jennifer Keeling, Deputy Director, Human Rights and Freedoms, joining us by video conference. Welcome. And Vindhya Seneviratne, Deputy Director, Sanctions Policy Division by video conference. Welcome again. So, at the last meeting, before I continue, again, just for the record, we have, I'm assuming we have unanimous consent to continue working throughout the time before the votes. At the last meeting, the committee agreed by unanimous consent to stand clauses 21 and 22. Stood clauses are considered after all the other clauses of the bill have been disposed of. We're now ready to go back to clause 21, which is now opened for debate. Yes.
I would ask the committee to move to G9, which is an amendment we are presenting. And it is with respect to Clause 21 that Bill C-219 in Clause 21 be amended A by replacing line 30 on page 9 with the following: Global Sanctions and Special Economic Measures Act, bracket, Sergei Magnitsky Law number 2, in the, and B, by replacing lines 26 and 27 on page 10 with the following: 1 is to be read as a reference to the Global Sanctions and Special Economic Measures Act, Sergei Magnitsky Law number 2.
So shall G9 carry? Agreed. Good. Shall clause 21 carry? As amended. As amended. Agreed. Okay. We then go next to clause 22, G10. And
again, amendment, I would ask the committee to turn to G10, and similarly that Bill C-219 in clause 22 be amended A by replacing line 30 on page 10 with the following: Global Sanctions and Special Economic Measures Act, Sergei Magnitsky Law number 2, in the, and B by replacing lines 4 and 5 on page 13 with the following: read as a reference to the Global Sanctions and Special Economic Measures Act, Sergei Magnitsky Law number 2. I would move that as an amendment.
Shall G10 carry? Agreed. Shall clause 22 as amended carry? Agreed. Okay, next we go to short title, G2.1.
And I would also have an amendment on that, and it's G-2.1. That Bill C-219 in Clause 1 be amended by replacing lines 1 and 2 on page 2 with the following: 1, this act be cited as the International Anti-Corruption and Human Rights Act, brackets, Sergei Magnitsky Law number 3. We may be the only country in the world with 3 Magnitsky laws.
Shall G-2.1 carry? On division. Shall the short title carry as amended?
Agreed.
On division or agreed? On division. We go next to the preamble, G1.
And I would also have an amendment on that and the preamble, that Bill C-219 in the preamble be amended by replacing lines 5 to 7 on page 1 with the following: foreign state, just in state, that has engaged in activities that undermine international peace, security, or stability in a manner inconsistent with international law, or who is responsible for or complicit in gross and systematic violations of internationally recognized human rights or acts of corruption.
Shall G1 carry? G2.
Agreed. So G2, with respect to ongoing with the preamble, that Bill C-219 in the preamble be amended by replacing lines 12 to 18 on page 1 with the following. And whereas this act will enable Canada to impose sanctions on foreign nationals who have engaged in activities that undermine international peace, security, or stability in a manner inconsistent with international law, or who are responsible for or complicit in gross and systematic violations of internationally recognized human rights or acts of corruption.
Shall G2 carry? Shall G-2 carry as amended? No, sorry. Yes, shall the preamble carry as amended? On division, okay. Next, we go to the title, G0.1.
And yes, I again have an amendment. The Bill C-219 be amended by replacing the long title on page 1 with the following. An act to amend the Department of Foreign Affairs Trade and Development Act, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, Sergei Magnitsky Law, and Special Economic Measures Act.
Dash 0.1 carry? Agreed. Shall the title as amended carry? Shall the bill as amended carry? Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for use of the House at report stage? Okay, that's it. I don't know what to do.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank members of the committee and the parliamentary secretary in particular for their cooperative approach here on working on this private members bill. I expressed it on behalf of my colleague, MP James Bazan. While we didn't agree on everything, I thought the process was constructive, and I want to thank all members of the committee, including Mr. Oliphant and Mr. Alexis Brunel de Sepp for their work on this.
Thank you. I think that represents the overall view of all the members. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if you would allow me, I think there's unanimous consent to move the following motion. After, I believe there have been discussions amongst members of the committee, and I'd like to move the following motion, that the committee recommends that the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, pursuant to Section 15 of the Broadcasting Act, A, requests that the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, CRTC, hold a hearing to determine whether CCTV 9 documentary, CCTV English News, CCTV Entertainment Channel, CCTV 4, and CCTV Francais should be removed from the list of non-Canadian programming services and stations authorized for distribution. B, requests the CRTC make a report as soon as feasible, and that the chair report this to the House.
Mr. Oliphant, do you have a comment on this?
Yes, and while we did have discussions, the critic and I had discussions with respect to this. When I've spoken to my colleagues, they have requested that 48 hours notice be given on this, and so we would not be able to give unanimous consent to have it debated and discussed today without 48 hours notice. That has been, so we would have to come back to this.
So there is no unanimous consent.
It's not unanimous.
So just to, could I ask Mr. Chair on a point of order, just for you to consult with the procedural clerk and tell us whether or not 48 hours notice is required for this motion?
I have actually
Okay.
proactively did that, and my understanding is you would need 48-hour
Okay.
notice.
So I consider my intervention notice of motion.
Excellent.
And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cho. Thank you. We will now briefly suspend in order to go in camera and discuss our last item on the agenda. Suspend.